Hello, good evening, and welcome everybody to tonight's episode of Geography of Hope. My name is Monica Shear, and I am the Director of Outreach here at Alaska Wilderness League. I am coming to you tonight from Southeast Pennsylvania, the traditional homelands of the Lenape peoples. And as the Director of Outreach, I have the great fortune with working with so many of you, our members and supporters, our partners and advocates, our donors and our champions to protect and preserve the public lands and waters of Alaska we all care so deeply about. Well, I've been at the League here a little over 14 years now. I was actually first introduced to the issue of the Arctic Refuge a few years prior, and it was an eye-opening experience that showed me for the first time the widespread support this issue had across the country and really how the power of the people could make all the difference in the world. The Arctic Refuge, as it currently sits, was formally designated as a wildlife refuge in 1980 by President Carter. However, the 1.5 million acre coastal plain, which many call, as do we, the biological heart of the Arctic Refuge, was left unprotected. Instead of protections, it was decided that Congress would need to determine if this area would be open for oil and gas development, or if it would be protected for its unique and critical wilderness values that support both animal and human populations. A majority of the American people have consistently supported protecting the Arctic Refuge's coastal plain for more than half a century, and that support remains strong today. Starting in 1986, however, legislation to protect the Arctic Refuge coastal plain as wilderness has been introduced and really demonstrates the widespread support this issue has. Despite this passionate support, legislative attempts to authorize drilling within the refuge's coastal plain started soon after its designation and were pursued year after year, as many of you know. Such drilling attempts were debated and defeated nearly 50 times in Congress. In December of 2017, after over 3 decades of debate, drilling was finally authorized as part of a massive legislative tax package, the final version of which includes a dangerous provision that mandates drilling revenue from the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge. This is the first time any national wildlife refuge in the United States has been opened and redesignated for oil and gas development. And while the first ever lease sale was held in January of this year, it was a colossal failure. Big Oil did not even make an appearance. The money was not raised as promised. President Biden, a few weeks later, signed an executive order on day one of his administration that would halt any and all activity in the coastal plain, providing us a window of opportunity we greatly needed to take swift action and assure that Congress repeals the lease sale mandate and restores protections. And while this work is needed, without the decades of support, action and involvement today of so many of the leadership and the inspiration of the Gwich'in that have guided us, we would not even have this opportunity to talk about protecting this place today. And we know change happens slowly, often too slowly, and grassroots achievements are rarely the result of one big flashy event, but rather the culmination of a steady and growing drumbeat. There's no singular moment or person to hold up in success, but when there are achievements, it is important that everyone recognize and celebrate the role they played. Tonight's program is a discussion and celebration with 3 amazing advocates that will help illustrate and bring to life the efforts of so many people, including many of you here tonight, that have been the backbone of protecting the Arctic Refuge over the decades. Please feel free to type any questions you may have in the chat at any time during the program and throughout our discussion. I will do my best to work them into the conversation, and we'll also leave space at the end to ensure we have the opportunity to answer all your questions. Over the decades, hundreds, thousands, and even millions of you have spoken up, engaged, talked, signed, rallied, and listened for the Arctic Refuge. And so while we can only feature a few glimpses of all the amazing work done tonight on the panel, I wanted to acknowledge that these examples and stories are just touching the tip of the grassroots iceberg. If any of you tonight have particular memories or stories about how you got involved in the Arctic Refuge campaign, or perhaps an action that you participated in over the years, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I would really love to see what brought you here tonight. And again, tonight is an opportunity to celebrate all of you and the community across the country and truly the world that has been built on the passion and care people have around the Arctic Refuge. And with that, I would like to quickly introduce our panelists and begin tonight's program. So tonight, I'm very excited to be joined by MIHO AIDA, who is an athlete, advocate, author, and film producer, and dare I say friend. In collaboration with partners, MIHO has taken her award-winning film, The Sacred Place Where Life Begins, Gwich'in Women Speak, on bicycle film tours since 2014, riding more than 3,000 miles across the country and amplifying the voices of the Gwich'in people along the way as they call for permanent protection of the coastal plain. I had the great honor of working with MIHO during one of her East Coast tours, and she's also done bike tours on the West Coast, and just thrilled that she's here to share her stories and involvement tonight. We're also joined by Alex Herraut, who is a climate change communicator and backcountry conservationist that lives on the road full time. He documents and shares his adventurous lifestyle on social media as a hook to encourage audiences to develop an emotional attachment to nature, experience it for themselves, and take action to protect it. Most recently, he played an integral role in the fight to save the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge through a platform called TikTok, which we will learn more about tonight. Spearheaded by Project Impact and the Campion Foundation, this social platform and its participants helped garner more than 6 million public comments to the Fish and Wildlife Service in opposition to seismic exploration on the refuge's coastal plain. And finally, but not least, we're joined tonight with Finis Dunaway, an author and professor of history at Trent University in Peterborough, Ontario. Finis has spent the past several years researching the history of the Arctic Refuge struggle, including interviewing Gwich'in leaders, scientists, and environmental activists across the continent. His new book, Defending the Arctic Refuge, A Photographer, an Indigenous Nation, and a Fight for Environmental Justice, is a story of this epic political battle told from the perspective of the grassroots movement. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to share a bit more about themselves. MIHO.
Thank you, Monica, for the wonderful introduction. And hi, everybody. Again, my name is MIHO AIDA. My pronouns are she, her, hers, or they, them, theirs. I also just go by MIHO. And I'm actually calling in from Tokyo, where I was born. And Japan is my ancestral homeland. So right now it's 8 o'clock, just a little past 8 o'clock in the morning on Thursday. So I'm calling you all from the future if you're in the US. As Monica introduced, I am a filmmaker, particularly with the Arctic. I play a role to promote the film that amplifies the voice of Gwich'in women. The title of the film is again, The Sacred Place Where Life Begins, Gwich'in Women Speak. I'm also an environmental educator. I've been educating students, primarily young people, and supporting them to connect with the natural world and with each other. And something that part of Alex's introduction talked about, making an emotional connection. I think it's really important for people to not just have a physical connection, but having that emotional connection. I believe that that's what moves people to change their behaviors and taking action. So that's what I'm also trying to do as an educator. So I'm also an athlete. I love just being outdoors. I enjoy multiple things. And most recently, I enjoyed watching cherry blossoms in Japan. It's my favorite thing to do in outdoors on my ancestral land. So thank you. I guess I'm going to turn it over to Alex.
Thanks, MIHO, and thanks, Monica. And hi, everybody. It's an honor to be here, seriously. I couldn't second enough what you just said, MIHO, about thinking that emotional attachment to nature is incredibly important. And obviously I dedicate myself to encouraging people to develop an emotional attachment like that through social media. And one thing that helps me do that really well is living on the road full time. So I'm tuning in from California, and I can actually turn my camera around, but that's my house. So I travel around in that little Subi constantly and put content out on social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube to encourage people to fall in love with nature and take action to protect it. And most recently, like Monica mentioned, Project Impact found me and teamed up with the Protect the Arctic campaign to be able to encourage as many people as possible to speak up about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the fight that's going on there. And it was really, really exciting to see, and I'm thankful that this community is as cooperative and empowering as everyone here is today. So it's a huge honor to be here. Absolutely stoked to be a part of it. And that's what I intend to continue doing for a while. Finest?
Yeah, I'm also excited to be here. I'm originally from Alabama, but moved steadily northward, living in North Carolina, New Jersey, upstate New York, and finally crossed the border into Canada, where I've been living for the last 17 years, teaching at Trent University in history and environmental studies. And a lot of my research has been on the history of the environmental movement, including the role of visual images, photography, film, and other media in galvanizing concern for environmental protection. And interesting to hear both of you talk, because a lot of my research and writing have actually been on the role of emotions in bringing that connection and fostering public concern for these issues. For the past few years, as Monica said, I've been researching the Arctic refuge struggle. And this project has been by far the most enjoyable, rewarding work I've ever done, in part because I've gotten to meet and interview so many fascinating, inspiring people. And so I hope that if you have the opportunity to look at the book at some point, that you will be able to, sort of pick up on some of the inspiration and the enthusiasm that I felt from having the honor and privilege of meeting with so many people and talking with them about this struggle for decades to protect this place in the Arctic. So thank you all for being here, and excited to share some stories with you.
Thank you all. And thanks for everyone who's been putting in the chat. I am so excited that what I'm seeing so far from Martin and your 40 years involvement on this issue to those who are new and have been brought in thanks to Alex's work and others in the social realm, that really is encompassing what we're trying to cover today, which is how this issue has inspired and engaged people throughout the decades, using whatever means necessary, and especially whatever was most able to help establish, as all of you referenced, that emotional connection. And for an area that most people will likely never experience, a lucky few have, and I've seen in the chat some rafting trips, that emotional connection still remains strong without even having to see it with your own eyes, and is something that's a testament to how the work's been done over the decades and the tools used. So I wanted to begin tonight's conversation with a question for all of you about grassroots. What is it? What does it mean? It is a word I use frequently. It is likely not one that many others may be as familiar with, and can mean different things to different people. And so, Finest, I'll start with you. Why did you really decide to focus on grassroots activism in your book about the Arctic Refuge?
Yeah, I didn't intend to. When I began working on this, I had no idea that that would end up being the focus. But the more research I did, the more convinced I became that, in fact, grassroots activism is what has made all the difference in protecting the refuge over the past few decades. And by grassroots, I guess I mean a few different things simultaneously. One is the building of unlikely alliances, of bringing diverse groups of people together, most especially in this case, environmentalists and indigenous peoples, but also others who've been motivated to express concern over this issue. I think it also means the involvement of everyday people, so not just celebrities or beltway politicians, but ordinary people in cities and towns across the continent who've engaged in the struggle. And finally, for most of this history, it's been grassroots involvement directed toward DC, because a lot of the focus of the campaign has been on legislative change. I say usually that's what it's been. I think since 2017, we've been in a different space where other realms have also been part of the struggle, corporate and banking and other such areas. In the research, I came across this phrase that I really think captures this idea so well of what refuge defenders have tried to do. It's a phrase that I found. This is a total like historian geek kind of thing, but in an obscure archive document somewhere, I found this phrase: the trickle up theory of politics. And this was said by activists at an Arctic Refuge strategy session meeting like 2 decades ago. And the basic idea, it's very counterintuitive, but how do you mobilize concern over this distant place? And their idea was to nationalize it. You bring it to the grassroots, to local communities, and then people write letters to the newspapers, to their elected officials, and then that concern trickles up to the national media and to federal policymakers. And I think that idea of the trickle up theory, even if it's not used very often, I think it's a great phrase and encapsulates the spirit of this movement for decades trying to protect Arctic Alaska. And so in the book, I have all kinds of examples, but I focus most especially on slideshows as a tool for galvanizing concern. And in particular, a slideshow that was created in 1988 by a small grassroots group in Sonoma, California. And one of the people involved in that group ended up taking the slideshow on the road for the next 2 decades, giving talks, up to 200 talks a year at churches, university lecture halls, public libraries, all with this goal of galvanizing everyday people, building support to trickle up, and building diverse alliances. This person was someone who worked very closely with Indigenous peoples, especially the Gwich'in in Alaska and Canada. Unlike many environmentalists before who had tended to focus on issues of wilderness values and wildlife protection, this campaign began to talk about human rights and Indigenous rights. And so I'll share some examples from the show later in this remarkable character named Lenny Combe, who I'm sure some of you out there may have had the pleasure of crossing paths with at some point. But I'll just end by saying for now that without grassroots involvement and without these alliances, there would probably be oil drills in the Arctic Refuge right now. That's how essential I think it is to the fight.
Wonderful, thank you. And MIHO, building on that, similar question, if you can talk about how you define grassroots, but also what really drew you into focusing your efforts to build up this grassroots power and how you saw your value there.
Yeah, thank you. So I really resonated with what Finance was talking earlier about, the movement built by everyday people. And I think that really kind of how I define a grassroots movement. To me, like um, grassroots, like if you just imagine the grass and the roots, right? Like it just like it kind of like start growing, then it's creating this like a kind of like very wide kind of growing. And then I also want to add this like element of even you pull the grass, it will come back and it just keep growing. So there's this like a persistency and the resiliency that I find in people. So I guess I would define like ordinary people getting together to create this extraordinary change that's really backed by this resiliency and persistency. And I guess like how when I think about my background in, part of this grassroots movement is like, I think it just goes all the way back to this picture of me being a baby, still a baby picture. And I have this like little banner kind of like stuck on my forehead when there's a little hair. And, that was a picture that when my parents went to be part of this labor movement when they're still like in very young, and it was back in 70s, and they went and became this part of like the big, like a big grassroots movement, the workers demanding the fair wage and all the other workers rights. So I guess that kind of energy was passed down to me since I was a baby. And then I also was part of a student union when I was in a junior high. So I feel like I grew up breathing the air of people power and the belief that we, the people, can organize and then make impact. And an impact not just politically, but also I think starts from our mindset, right? The way that we think. So like start from like how we think and how we can be open and grow and in our community. And eventually that becomes, hopefully, to the policy, because the policy really impacts everything that as, we do and we are in part of the society. So I guess that's how I define grassroots movement and my involvement in that.
Amazing, thank you. And I love the persistency and the resiliency. I think necessary and important traits that you can't find a grassroots movement without. And so then Alex, kind of to you, being, I think, more in a position at the forefront where you've seen how people power and building has really changed and evolved with the advent of social media and how that's grown even in the last decade. What do you really think of when you hear grassroots and that kind of engagement?
Yeah, when I think of grassroots, I think of a community of people just standing together as one awe-inspiring entity. It's pretty similar, honestly, to like what MIHO was just saying about like actually envisioning grass. Like one blade of grass isn't that much of a force to be reckoned with, right? But an entire field is rather captivating. And being in its presence changes you. It affects your mood. It alters your way of thinking for the better. Like name any ecosystem and that applies, right? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think beyond that, the whole actually empowers each of its parts. And that's especially true with grassroots campaigns. Each new person that steps into a relationship with reciprocal credibility. So every single person can work with the backing and credibility of the entire field, and through that inspire change. So effectively, a grassroots movement is at its core a team. And often people think of grassroots movements as accomplishing one big thing together as a unit. And that's true. But that said, it's also about empowering each individual part of the unit, individual blade of grass, to have an impact within its unique circumstance. So like with the Protect the Arctic TikTok campaign, there's, you know, the Gwich'in, the Protect the Arctic team. It expanded to the whole space. Like MIHO finest, myself, the passionate 8-year-old that suggested letter writing to his teacher as an extra credit homework assignment, and then that teacher suggested to other teachers and got the entire elementary school sending in letters. Like the strategy teams and many members of the coalition that understood what the best call to action was and passed it on to communicators who then passed best practices between each other. The college students, you know, that took this to their homes at Christmas time and got their siblings and their parents and their grandparents writing letters, and then the grandparents that called their neighbors afterwards and told their neighbors about it. Like every single one of us can lean on the movement that we validate together to back ourselves and each other up, and use that credibility to make change in specific ways that only we can. So grassroots efforts, to me, are best accomplished when they hang on the intertwined trust and expertise of an entire diverse village.
Awesome. Well, I'm now going to have to rewrite my answer for what I think grassroots is after hearing the three of you, because I really feel like you captured it beautifully and really explained how together there are so many positive accomplishments, and not only just accomplishments, but the community building, the team effort, and the establishment of resiliency. So Alex, I'm going to stick with you for a minute, but I know I mentioned before, this is an issue that covers many different aspects of what might inspire someone to get involved, be it human rights, be it climate, be it wildlife, ecosystem, and has touched many that have never seen it firsthand or been up there. And so to that, why and how did you really become interested in issues facing the Arctic Refuge when there's so much going on in the world and our climate in general?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is. That's a great question. I heard about it first back in 2017 when the initial tax bill was passed. And then when it surfaced again in late summer of last year, when it re-entered the news, that's when I really started looking into it, like August, September-ish. And of course, I was struck by the idea of drilling there for all the reasons you just mentioned and that we're all familiar with, that, you know, it's sacred to the Gwich'in and they've yet to be listened to. The species from every continent besides Antarctica go there to birth their young. And on top of the damage it would do to climate, it doesn't make financial sense. And then the more that I thought about it, the more I realized that this is kind of the perfect issue to educate through. Like it's such an obviously bad idea that it's a slam dunk for getting people passionate about environmental work. And it has so many nuances and easy to understand touch points in social, environmental, and economic impact that audiences can see how those things are not separate but tied together in every single issue that we face. Um, so I thought that I'd use my platform to get involved because I, one, believed in the issue and wanted to help fix it, and two, saw potential for generating lifelong environmentalists through it. And so for that reason, it'd be even more likely to succeed on a platform like TikTok. And then Protect the Arctic came along with their campaign, and they were searching to support people that were looking to tell the story in new spaces with new media. And we teamed up, started to meet more people like yourself and everyone here, and from the Gwich'in, from other spaces in the coalition, and then we all worked together to do the best we could, and the rest is kind of history on that.
Yeah, big history. And then MIHO, kind of building on that, as someone who had the opportunity to really go up and experience and sit and listen and be in this issue on the land, how would you define your relationship with the Arctic and what it means to you?
Yeah, I think for me, my entry point was really to connect with one of the Gwich'in elders, Sarah James, in 2010 when I got this grant from my work. It's called NatureBridge. We're an environmental education organization. They provided grants to their employees to follow their dreams. So because NatureBridge, we educate young people to connect with the natural world and inspire responsible action to sustain our environment. So I tell a lot of stories of, and we do that work in the national parks. So when it comes to public land and the stories of public land, and when it comes to people, I've been noticing that there's this lack of voice of indigenous people. And I got this grant to really seek out an opportunity to listen to indigenous leaders who are currently active to protect our public land. So I did my own homework, and I found Sarah James. So that's a backstory of why I connected with Sarah James. And she was just very open. I just basically made a cold call, introduced myself, and had an interest in interviewing her. And she was just like, "Okay, we need more people like you. So why don't you come up and we'll sit and we talk." And that was a very warm invitation. So I said, "Thank you, I'll be there." And realized that there was no road to Arctic Village. I looked on the Google map and, looked at where Arctic Village is and like, whoa, how am I going to get there from Fairbanks? So anyhow, I used the grant money to get the, plane ticket. It's pretty much just like, I'm just going to get there and then see what happens. And then that turned into this beautiful relationship building with Sarah James, and she introduced me to other folks in Arctic Village, and also asked me if I would be interested in listening to other Gwich'in women, because in 2010 there was a Gwich'in gathering that was happening in Fort Yukon, Alaska, and that's where she was going, and she asked me if I would join her and come with her and then interview other Gwich'in women. So I that is when I had an opportunity to uh, listen to other um, Gwich'in women, and my intention was really to create the media that really shares the voice from their perspective, their relationship with the Arctic, and why it's an important place for them. So I never had a background in filmmaking, so it was just a learning experience for me, and I had no really budget to create anything. So it's really something that my film is not fancy at all. It's just really grassroots. Again, it's like a people power film. But I think I think one of the greatest things that happen is that for me to be able to just recognize amount of privilege that I have, and
Mhm.
also me coming into the community and working with the Gwich'in people. It was a very humbling experience for me to recognize the part of like a colonized behaviors that I have, the mindset that I have, and just listen to their voice and think about how I can best share their voice in a way that can be supportive of the work that they've been doing, for a really long time. For 500 years, or since the colonization began. So I'm just there to support in any way that I could. So that was my connection and a relationship to the Arctic.
Fearless. I love it. Just a call and a flight. And then really the ability to sit and listen and absorb, which I think is something that to me resonates as like the connection to Lenny, and what Finus was really researching in his book is his desire to sit and listen and really learn from folks on the ground and from the indigenous communities in the Gwich'in. And so Finus, please do tell us more about this amazing character, Lenny Combe, that I hope many here had gotten the chance to meet. And if not, this will bring a little bit of him to the audience tonight, who he was and really how he became involved in all of this.
Yeah, so he was a very unlikely activist. He was someone who trained as a percussionist at the Berklee College of Music. He became a jazz drummer. He claims to have once jammed with Jimi Hendrix. I could never confirm whether that was true or not, but the possibility certainly exists. And then he joined a jazz rock fusion band in the Bay Area in the 60s and 70s. And they had a pretty big local following, and they opened for like The Dead and Santana and CCR and like other Bay Area icons. And in 1977, he decided that he was probably the 238th best drummer in the world. And I just love the quantitative precision there. And that was great, but he was never going to be better than that. And so he wanted to do something else with his life. He moved to Sonoma, California, where he got a job. This is very old school, compared to hearing about TikTok videos. So he was the guy who developed people's film when they came into the drugstore to drop off their film rolls. And from that, he started to develop an interest in photography and became a freelance photojournalist. And in 1987, he went up to the Arctic because he heard that Audubon magazine was planning to run a special issue on the refuge because the Reagan administration was planning to drill there. And so he went up to the Arctic basically with the hope of selling some photos. But he had a life-changing experience. He would always call this his epiphany, which happened first in Arctic Village, and then that led him to Old Crow, Yukon. And it was his time on the land with the Gwich'in where he began to understand the push for oil development as a form of contemporary colonialism. And that really is what drove his activism. He went back to California, all fired up about this issue, having never done any political organizing in his entire life. And at that point, he was 47 years old, and formed a very small grassroots group, which included various folks from the community, also someone who recently had moved from Alaska. And they did a slideshow, which was photographs, narration, music, soundtrack, and they used this thing called a fade dissolve unit, so that like one slide fades in as the other one fades out. And I'll show you an example of this now, just to give you a sense of the show. So this is Lenny Combe here in one of my favorite pictures of all time, wearing his red long johns and floppy blue hat somewhere in the Arctic. This is the title slide from the show. And the show layers a bunch of issues from wilderness and wildlife values, including photographs taken by Wilbur Mills, who went up to the refuge in the late 60s and early 70s. Fran Maurer, a US Fish and Wildlife Service biologist, this aerial photo he took of the migration of the porcupine caribou herd. Another shot by Wilbur Mills. Photos by Pamela A. Miller of oil development in Prudhoe Bay to show you what might happen to the Arctic refuge if drilling were to proceed. And then the show transitions to Gwich'in country, especially to the area around Old Crow, Yukon. And so I'm going to play a segment of a digitized version of the show so you'll get a sense of how they use the Fey Dissolve unit. And you'll also hear interviews with Randall and Mabel Tetlichi, recorded by Lenny Combe in their cabin in Old Crow, Yukon.
It seems to me that the time has come to listen to the wisdom of these people who have been stewards of the land for thousands of years.
Lenny, we want to be heard. We want the whole world to know we do exist.
What would you tell them?
I'll tell them we live north of the Arctic Circle and we've been living off the land for centuries, and that we depend on the porcupine caribou herd every day of our lives. I mean, I did since I was born, and my grandparents and grandparents, only God knows how many grandparents before me depend on it. And now I want to see my grandchildren depend on it. I mean, we make use of everything on the caribou, right from the hoofs right to the horn. We make games out of it, we make different medicine out of it, we eat it, we make clothes with it, we make tools with it. You know, that's our survival. If there's no caribou, we're gonna have a hard time with it. And I hope people from the south listen to us and try to get the picture that we talk about. Well, the Creator made the land for everybody, all the races. And what Native people do is try to respect that, try to respect the Creator. And a lot of old people say, well, material things won't help you. The spiritual side of life, and learning how to be kind and having respect and patience and good reason for all your movements without hurting anybody is very important.
Me as an individual, I have respect for the land as a Native person. I have respect for everywhere I go. We're just people that live off the land. And
It seems to me that the time.
And so the show also includes photographs from the first Gwich'in gathering held in 1988, which Lenny Combe attended. And as you can hear in the voices of the people talking about their concern for the Arctic Refuge as something that is about their human rights, about their cultural survival, about their food security. And this was something that until 1988 was not a major part of the campaign at the national level. And so at the grassroots level, you have this small group in Sonoma, California, creating the slideshow, and then for years to come, continuing to build trust, to build relationships. And so some of those photographs of people you see in the show were people that would later join Lenny Combe on tours across the United States to share their stories, to mobilize public concern for the refuge. And so it's a very surprising story, I think, that this small group of amateur activists in Sonoma, California could really in working in cooperation with the Gwich'in, because he was invited up there by Norma Cassie, a Vuntut Gwich'in leader, to spend time on the land with her family and to visit other camps in the area, that this small grassroots group really helped reframe public understanding of this place and build trust and relationships that have lasted for decades to come and have played an absolutely essential role in protecting the Arctic Refuge.
Thank you for sharing that. I did see a couple comments that did bring a lot back, hearing Lenny's voice. And yeah, as I'm seeing, I feel like as I've done the work over the last decade and a half, there's very few places I can go where I will not run into someone that will mention either having attended or having heard about one of Lenny's slideshows. So yeah, thank you, Harvey. So there you go. Even here tonight, the legacy lives on, which I think is a testament to Grassroots and especially how Lenny took the story and was able to share the story and understood what was important about the story and the people, and doing it in such a respectful and important way. And I mean, that fake technology, it was pretty cool back in the day. And even though Lenny might have been driving around with his projector and his carousel of slides, you know, I like to think of it as technology might have changed, but it wasn't all that long ago. I was driving around with my projector and a laptop and doing slideshows in a very similar fashion of showing what is and what could be, and speaking to rooms that sometimes had 100 and sometimes had 10. And when I was speaking to those rooms of 10 people, if anyone had the opportunity to hang out or spend some time with Lenny, he had told me a long time ago that it didn't matter how big the audience was. It just mattered that people were there. And you never knew where that critical voice was going to come from. And he always instilled, you have to talk to everyone, right? I mean, Lenny, I guarantee if you were sitting next to him on the plane, you walked off, you knew all about the Arctic Refuge. If you were like at a diner counter, you probably left after your cup of coffee knowing about the Arctic Refuge. And so just remembering that it's not always about the size, but it's the fact that you, whoever you are and however you're doing it, are going out and you're using your voice in a way that really makes an impact. And you never know where that's going to take you, and who that's going to impact in turn. And Jesse, I love that he told you the same thing. And as you can see, even those words of advice have gone long and far. And so kind of leading into that, I really wanted to get in with our panelists tonight and hear some of the success stories and why, you know, from Lenny starting in the late 80s to, you know, just a few months ago, why and how, all these grassroots interventions and efforts have been successful, from big rallies on Capitol Hill to the, you know, 10-person Rotary Club talks that some of us might have given back in the day. And so with that, MIHO, I'll ask you, especially as someone who really did this kind of on your own and, you know, displayed a strength not only in kind of taking on this new adventure and trying to really sit and learn both, you know, personally, but also then literally biking the coasts of the United States to share the story and share the words and wisdom and the stories of the Gwich'in women. What is your strength, and really like where do you see how it played into a success, and what's a story that you want to share?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think when I think of like a success, so many things came up in my mind. And I would say that, you know, I definitely created this film to, you know, educate people about the issue of the Arctic through the lens of Gwich'in women. And I think, you know, that is my intent. And I also wanted to make sure that I create something that also have a, you know, positive impact on Gwich'in community as well. So when I shared the final draft with Sarah James, you know, before I, you know, publish that, I just want to make sure that, you know, people who got involved with the film and, you know, actually speaking in the film, like I just want to make sure I get it okay. And then I shared the film with Sarah James, and, you know, she watched, and And it was around the Christmas time in 2013. And she said like, well, I guess you listened to us. And that to me is like the best compliment. Like, you know, this film ended up getting some awards, but to me that was like, you know, it just shows my intent to, you know, create something that also resonate and make positive impact on the Gwich'in people, and in particularly Sarah James. Like hearing that words from her was probably the best, you know, compliment, you know, as a result. So to me, that's definitely one of the successes, especially non-Indigenous person creating a film that includes the voice of Indigenous people. It was just really important to me. The other success, I really resonated with Lenny's words. Like, it doesn't matter how many people are in a room, that actually people are there. You know, these are the important people who you know, the important people is going to be there. And, you know, and I think back when Monica and I, you know, toured on the East Coast, and there was a day only 2 people showed up. And, you know, I kept remembering, you know, the Lenny's words, like, you know, actually the fact that people showed up, that's important. So I think I just tried to remember that, and just thinking like the impact that Sarah James made on me. You know, she spent like 3 weeks really taking her time and talking to me. And, you know, she just, you know, talked to me. I'm just one person, but I also felt the power that I, you know, honestly didn't have a plan to make a film. But when she asked if I would be interested in making a film, and, you know, just one way to support her work, and I had to say yes to the invitation. And I just didn't know how my involvement with the Arctic would unfold in this way. So, you know, without her encouragement and her impact, just one person, right? Like, it's just me, but it just really, you know, trickled, you know, to so many different people through my bike tour or just through my film. And I know that there are people who probably watched the film and, you know, wrote the letter to their representatives. And sometimes I hear that, and sometimes it's just a, you know, random email I get, like, you know, thanks for the film, or, you know, that kind of encouragement. And just seeing the impact, I think to me, just like some success they're seeing, but also there's so many unseen success. And again, the goal is really, you know, I'm an educator. So if people feel like this is something they didn't know before, they learn, and then more of the Indigenous struggle in the modern context, because often I hear people talk about Indigenous people in the past tense, and they're still here and their struggles continue. And to me, bringing that, you know, contemporary story of Indigenous people, you know, seeing them speaking to you, I think that is really important to me. So people understanding that, you know, struggles continue, and there is a way that people can support and stand in solidarity in the work that Gwich'in people have been doing for a really long time. So these are just a few examples of success from my experience.
That's amazing. And yeah, when you say how, I do remember one event when we only had 2, and I remember a bad thunderstorm coming through and you calling and we picking you up under a pine tree so that you were safe. And I remember having great events at libraries and upwards. You never know what you're going to get on a bike tour, but then, you know, it's like you don't often get, Grassroots isn't often linear with all the dots connected. But I remember a few years ago, we had a fly-in and someone had mentioned they were there because they had seen your film and started to learn about the issue. And so, you know, Grassroots can take a little while. It can take a minute or 2 to fully evolve and see how it builds. But when it does, I think you don't have any more powerful force than someone who's made a commitment to an issue because of something they've seen or heard, which is often because of people like you. So thank you. Finus, I was hoping you could share an inspirational example of a grassroots success that you found in your research on this issue.
Yeah, well, the book is filled with lots of them, so it's kind of hard to choose one because this struggle has been going on for so long, and because it's been, so punctuated by numerous tense moments and close calls when the outcome could have gone either way. One that I profile occurred 30 years ago, 1991, right after the first Gulf War happened, and there was a real push to open up the Arctic Refuge on the supposed grounds of national energy security. George H.W. Bush was president then. And early in that year, in the spring, a bill called the Johnson-Wallop bill, which is a big energy bill, which included a provision for Arctic refuge drilling, that passed the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee by an overwhelming vote, 17-3. A bill that would have an Arctic drilling provision, and most observers felt that it was very likely that it would pass. And then so over the course of the next several months, refuge defenders organized and mobilized to try to stop that from happening. And this included slideshow tours. So not only Lenny, who went on a bunch of tours that year, but the Northern Alaskan Environmental Center in Fairbanks, they had a copy of the slideshow as well, the exact same slideshow. They sent out activists. There was a third copy in California, one of the original members of the Sonoma group. He went out on slideshow tours. Many of these people joined by Gwich'in representatives, including Lenny, who was joined by Glenna Frost from Old Crow, Yukon. And by the fall, with no one really knew what was going to happen right up into the last minute. And on November 1st, the Senate voted to scuttle the bill. So the refuge defenders won. There were parties on Capitol Hill. Apparently, Paul Wellstone went to one with the refuge defenders. And in Old Crow, Yukon, they actually shut down the school the next day so that they could have a community feast to celebrate the victory. And I think that's such a powerful story because, we think about events happening on Capitol Hill as being very distant, very removed from a lot of our lives, even more so removed from a small indigenous community north of the Arctic Circle. Yet they follow US elections, they follow these votes very closely, so much so that they would hold this community celebration to celebrate this historic victory over the bill. Obviously, it wasn't the last time that the Arctic Refuge would be under threat, and this has been a recurring part of the history, but time and time again, there have been these tense moments, these close calls when the outcome could have gone either way. But I want to actually return to something MIHO said at the beginning, which I think is really important. It's these close moments, these tense times when it seems like maybe drilling will be approved, maybe the oil companies will finally get in, but it's also this longer term story, this story of persistence, of staying engaged, of staying involved, year after year, decade after decade. And to me, that is really maybe even the most inspiring part of this, is not just those pivotal moments, those close calls, but the fact that over the decades, this coalition, this struggle could sustain itself, could grow, could develop different forms of media to engage with in order to bring in more diverse groups of people in the fight. But 1991 is a critical one, as are many other moments that follow, many of them during the George W. Bush years as well.
Thank you. And I love we don't often get to hear or learn about sometimes the celebrations that happen, as you were saying, in Old Crow. We know DC's easy for a party, but that's, I appreciate you sharing how it is received on the other end and the appreciation there as well. And so kind of to close out some of our stories of success, Alex, how do you envision success when working on these issues and the refuge in particular? And this might be a layup, but like, when have you been surprised by people's participation?
Yeah. So for me, success is a yes to the question, did we do the thing? And the thing is never participation based. It's tangible real world impact. So, like a positive change in policy that's enforced in the real world, a permanent shift in business operation, a life change for someone who wouldn't have taken that step otherwise. And personally, as a climate communicator, I first and foremost want to take on projects seeking to combat climate change and pull them off as quickly as possible, because that's what's best for everyone who lives on Earth. So I think, we could all agree that at any point in these past many years, if just one letter written very well to the right person somehow managed to convince everyone to never drill in the Arctic Refuge ever again, then we did it. That's tangible impact. Now, the second half of climate communicator is communicator. So I keep an eye out for issues where the participating audience can learn about interconnectedness, specifically social and environmental empathy through the issue, because that brings potential for a very passionate grassroots movement to the table, which will tee up actual success getting the thing done very, very well. Now, in terms of like when I've been surprised, a super reputable creator, and if like anyone here from TikTok might flip about Hank Green, because we tried to get Hank Green to say something about this when we were doing the campaign back in December, but he said it really, really well when he said that when you're a creator, you understand what it takes for something to go viral, but it always takes some luck. So you just give everything that you make the best odds of taking off you can, so the least luck is required. And then when it takes off, you're actually not surprised. You're thankful and you're excited, but it makes sense. You calculated that, so you're not surprised. So the lot of participation was very exciting and larger than expected, but relatively predicted. Now, I was very surprised by the way that people participated. And I think one of the most beautiful aspects of the Protect the Arctic TikTok campaign was how unique everyone's voice was. Like who everybody got involved and how. Like the elementary schooler that I mentioned earlier, he commented what he did on one of my videos, and then tons of teachers saw that comment online and followed suit at their own schools. A girl knitted a polar bear stuffed animal while talking about the refuge, and that went viral on TikTok. They got like over 700,000 views in like a couple days. People brought it to their coworkers. They spoke about it on live streams. They made videos in Spanish. This one high schooler made these like hilarious, sarcastic videos in his basement complaining about how this would ruin the life of his two best friends who were out of the shot. And then he brought them into the shot, and they were the scarf wearing Coca-Cola polar bears on like an old cup that he had lying around, which was hilarious and people loved it. And so success is defined entirely by tangible impact, and the numbers are fine. They're phenomenal, but I'm most blown away by what people can do when you trust them. And what I think is so special about this community, like us specifically talking and watching on this Zoom call behind all our phones and computers and everyone in this space that couldn't make it today, is that trust in each other has been demonstrated so well, and it's flowered into this powerful movement where there's now intergenerational trust between experts, trust between friends, and between organizations and the public. And that's culminated into this free flow of resources that enables everyone to do what they're good at incredibly well. Like today, across this entire conversation, we've learned what happens when you just let everyone do what they do best. And I look forward seeing trust like that blossom in every campaign around the world as we see this model implemented in more grassroots campaigns, and especially seeing that trust continue to grow between all of us as we continue on the path to save the Arctic refuge forever.
Awesome. Thank you. I agree, Thea. Yep, I hear you. The trust is important, and really not necessarily knowing it would be one. I have noticed it's a theme and just an underlying thread throughout all of the conversations today, be it the trust in the relationships that were built, trust in the work that people were doing, trust in the fact that when we, environmental organizations or others, asked people to participate, that it was important and meaningful. And so, yes, a lot of trust going on, and don't think we would be here without such trust. And so I'm going to wrap up with one quick final question for each panelist, and then I'm going to have a minute and tell all of you how you can get involved and take that trustful, meaningful action. Right now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we are in a pretty critical moment for the Arctic Refuge. And so stay tuned for about the next 5 minutes. And again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. And so just to close up with the three of you, how do you see Grassroots continuing to evolve and adapt in today's society? And so, Alex, I'll just start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think I would just like re-emphasize the same thing. I think that it's going to become a much more, like we've talked this entire time about how like it could either be a lot of people in the room or like a couple people in the room. And I think that we've entered into an age where like the couple people in the room could literally be anybody, and they have the potential to do like incredible things. Like the world that we live in now can take like anyone, if they like pitch themselves in the right way to a platform, can suddenly have a huge platform. And so that's really exciting, and I'm excited to see more people just understand and be open about like what it is that they're good at and figure out how they can fit into the collective goal that is saving the Arctic Refuge, saving the world in general, and working together a lot more to just pump each other up. Because one of the things I love the most about like conservation in general and like the environmental and social advocacy spheres is that they're the most collaborative like industry, if you want to say that, like, you know, group of friends. Really, everyone wants to do the same thing, and everyone recognizes that we all have like our different niches and different sets of expertise. And I think that people are really starting to appreciate that more, and we're moving away from an era of a society that's like generally competitive and into one that's a lot more cooperative, and that makes me so excited.
That is, yeah, a wonderful take and a very positive evolution and adaptation that will serve us well. Finus, do you have a thought on how Grassroots continues to adapt and evolve?
Yeah, I think as a rule, historians are terrible at predicting the future, and I'm certainly guilty of that. So I do think we're in a very interesting and exciting time and space than we were, say, a few months ago. I think particularly the appointment of Deb Haaland as Secretary of the Interior signals some potential for major changes regarding public lands, regarding energy, climate policy. And so there's reason for perhaps greater hope for the future than there was only a short time ago, in ways that I think many of us could not have really anticipated. I hope it's okay, I would just like to put up really quickly the cover of the book to show people, because I'm very pleased with how it turned out. This is a photograph of caribou migrating, taken in the Yukon by Peter Mather, a contemporary photographer. And I wanted people to know that that all of the author royalties for the book I'm going to donate to the Gwich'in Steering Committee as a way to honor and support their ongoing work, because I think their voice has not only been essential the past few decades, but will continue to be so in any struggles around the Arctic Refuge, as well as I think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening within Alaska right now regarding efforts to move toward a just transition away from fossil fuels, a state that has been so dependent, reliant, tied to the fossil fuel energy extractive economy. And so I think Gwich'in and other indigenous peoples in Alaska are going to play, this is my one prediction, maybe my one hope for the future. I think they're going to play a really crucial role, as well as environmental allies in that state, in trying to move Alaska to a more sustainable economy that will make a difference for all of us. So in any case, there's the book cover and some more information.
Amazing, thank you. And I encourage everyone, order the book, learn, and thank you for supporting the Gwich'in Steering Committee in the way that you do. I know that's one of the biggest opportunities that we can do as allies, is to continue to support those on the front line in any way we can, voice elevation, monetarily, etc. So MIHO, close us out. How are we going to continue to adapt and evolve in the grassroots sphere?
Yeah, I think that when I think of like evolution of grassroots movement moving forward from here, is that it's something that I think it's a key, is that I'm already seeing this the intersection of so many different movements coming together. So the Arctic, when I think about when I got involved, right, we're still talking about, you know, how we can center the indigenous movement and the indigenous voice into this traditionally white-led environmental movement. And now, like after a decade, like all of us today talked about, Gwich'in people and the importance of like centering the indigenous movement. Like now, like that's a part of this, like it's almost a norm in our conversation. So I think that would continue, but also like when I think about, racial justice movement, for example, that it is directly tied with our, people's basic human rights access to nature, regardless of race and gender and so many other different identities and social locations that people have. So I think moving forward that, really paying attention to intersection where, so many different movements can come together and really like moving toward one direction. Like we all really wanted to, keep this home, like the earth is really the only home. And we cannot protect the planet without the well-being of everyone, right? Like if human species continue to fight within among us, like there's no way that we can, continue to exist on this planet. So I think just all these different movements in the past may be categorized in different ways, but I think coming together and finding a common ground among different movements, I think that has a potential to create this one massive movement, for the Arctic or for Black Lives Matter, right? Like for the LGBTQ plus movement. Like there's so many different things that's going on, but I think that march is just like, I can see that it's coming to the horizon and that really unite all of us together. So that's where I have a hope for. And also just seeing these waves of young generations being involved. And, I'm definitely not the most tech savvy person, but just seeing that, Alex is, just a way that you can use a social media and just like a platform where the globe is now the platform that you can really engage people. And I just, through my work, it's really more about in-person connection. And I, there's just a different way, like a very diverse ways to engage people at the different levels and different ages. And I think that it's also amazing to just watch, particularly during the COVID-19 when in-person interaction was really limited and people really use that as an opportunity, right? Any like a crisis can be seen as a, barrier, but also an opportunity to come up with something different and something new. So I really, hope that can be a potential to create a global movement for things that typically seen as a more local and a regional struggles.
Wonderful. Yes. And, with that kind of expanding and what the past year circumstances have brought about, we would not necessarily have had Geography of Hope. We wouldn't have had the last 20 approximate episodes where we got to have this unique opportunity to share the stories of so many and the stories of so many public lands and waters in Alaska with all of you, because we were no longer contained to trying to be on the ground and in person. And so for that, at least I am thankful. And now knowing and understanding exactly how critical your participation and Grassroots movement has been in protecting the Arctic Refuge all of these years, I did want to share how you could help now. And so, as I mentioned, we are currently working diligently to assure that we can reverse and repeal the mandate that's in the tax bill, which still is law, that another lease sale be held in the coastal plain. And so the biggest thing we can do right now is urge President Biden to work with Congress and seal the deal for Arctic refuge protections. So you can just go to alaskawild.org/protect, sign your name to the petition, and lend your voice. There's going to be many, many more opportunities coming up in the coming weeks and months where this is going to be critical. And so this is an initial first step that will help us get the ball rolling for this very, very important moment. Also, I wouldn't be remiss to end one of these episodes without thanking all of you who are on that are our current donors, and to encourage anyone who is on who may not be, if you're able to also donate and really invest in the future of Wild Alaska's lands and waters and the people that are doing the work and enable us to engage and support so many others. And so a lot of what we heard about tonight, be it the Wilderness Weeks, the fly-ins to DC of people from across the country, and the Gwich'in, MIHO's bike tour, my slideshows, Lenny's slideshows, none of that would be possible without all of your donations and support. And so I really do say thank you for enabling us to do our work in such an impactful way. So we've got a goal for Earth Week, for Earth Day, which is tomorrow, to get 160 donations in honor of the 1.6 million acre Arctic Refuge coastal plain. And you see, we were very reasonable. We didn't ask for 1.6 million donations, 160. We're halfway there. So please, if you have a minute, help us reach our goal. It'll mean so much before Earth Day tomorrow, and I'll be eternally grateful. And of course, if you want to know more about the issues, if you want to know more about events we have coming up, if you want to just get the latest news and resources, you can follow us on our social media. Probably not as engaging maybe as Alex and some of the other great influencers, but we've got some good stories, and Alaska's never short on images and photos that will brighten your day. So we have our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter down there. Please feel free to give us a share. And with that, I really just want to say a heartfelt thank you to our participants, Finest, Alex, and MIHO. I am so fortunate to have the opportunity to have worked with all of you, to get to know all of you, and to bring us together tonight and really highlight the grassroots and the involvement of people from across the country has been a joy. And I saw so many positive comments in the chat. And, you know, for those that didn't necessarily know all the stories or all the histories, or for those of you that have been part of it over the years that I know, I just say thank you. Hang in there, stick with us, take action. And you know what, we're going to get this across the finish line, and we are going to succeed this year. And with that, thank you all. Stay in touch, be safe, and I hope to see you soon.